Hey everyone, welcome to Stories Tage. Today's story is one of revenge, pain, and ultimate triumph. Samuel's journey from being shunned and ridiculed to becoming a powerful force of justice will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more amazing stories like this one. The Early Pains. Born in solitude, Maya Thompson, a young black girl, was born into a family that carried the weight of racial prejudice, in a small town that mirrored the deep divisions of the wider society. From the moment she entered the world, Maya's life was marked by rejection. Her father, Edward, never saw her as his daughter. He resented her very existence, as if her skin color was a daily reminder of something he could never accept. Maya's first cry, instead of bringing joy or pride, echoed through the old house as a symbol of the division between her and her father. Edward's distaste for his own child was evident in every glance, every word, every gesture. He never held her, never called her by name, and rarely acknowledged her presence. His bitterness ran so deep that it felt like a shadow hanging over her childhood. Maya's mother, Rose, was different. She loved Maya with an intensity that could be felt in every hug, every whispered word of reassurance. But Rose was powerless against Edward's cruelty. Her love was genuine, but her strength was not enough to shield Maya from the coldness of her father's contempt. Rose would try, sometimes, to soothe Maya when her father was not around, wrapping her arms around her like a fragile fortress. But the moments of comfort were fleeting, and the harshness Maya faced from her father left deep scars that Rose could never heal. Maya often found herself yearning for more than her mother's love. She wanted acceptance, validation, and most of all, she wanted her father to see her not as a burden, but as his child, worthy of love. In the quiet of the night, when Maya lay in her bed, she would often hear the muffled voices of her parents arguing. Her father's angry words and her mother's soft pleas blurred together, creating a toxic soundtrack to her early years. She longed for a world where she could escape the stifling air of rejection, but in her small house, there was nowhere to hide. The walls, the floors, even the rooms themselves seemed to echo the pain of a family torn apart by hatred and misunderstanding. Maya grew up feeling like an outsider, even within her own home. Her parents' strained relationship and her father's hostility made her feel more like a stranger in her own skin, never truly accepted or loved by those who should have protected her the most. Society and rejection. The world outside Maya's home was not any kinder. In the small town, Maya quickly became the target of the other children. From an early age, she was given the derogatory nickname Monkey Girl. To the children, her appearance was a source of mockery, and they delighted in reminding her of how different she was. Maya had dark skin, thick, wild hair, and features that didn't fit the town's narrow, idealized view of beauty. The teasing started when she was young, and as she grew older, it only worsened. The children would call her cruel names, laughing behind her back, pointing fingers, and making fun of her whenever she passed by. Every glance felt like a verbal slap. Every whispered word felt like a dagger aimed at her heart. At first, Maya didn't understand why she was the subject of their ridicule. She was just like any other child, with hopes, dreams, and a desire for companionship. But as she saw how other children interacted with one another, laughing and playing without a care in the world, she began to realize that she wasn't welcome in their world. She was different, too dark, too awkward, too other for them to accept. The laughter of her peers became a constant soundtrack in her life, reminding her that she would always be the outsider, the one who didn't belong. Despite her mother's best efforts to comfort her, Maya couldn't escape the pain of being rejected by the community around her. Rose would often tell Maya to hold her head up high, to ignore the taunts, but Maya's confidence was shattered by years of rejection. Every day at school felt like an emotional battlefield, and even when she returned home, the sting of exclusion didn't go away. Rose loved her, but that love wasn't enough to shield Maya from the world outside. The constant teasing and rejection from the children in her town made Maya feel invisible, as though she didn't matter at all. The isolation Maya felt was compounded by the absence of true friendships. She longed for someone to understand her, someone who wouldn't judge her based on the color of her skin or the way she looked. But the children in her town never gave her the chance. Instead, they formed tight-knit groups, and Maya was left standing on the outside, watching as they built connections that she could never be a part of. Each rejection, each taunt, each look of disdain chipped away at her self-esteem. Maya's heart ached for the normality of childhood, where she could laugh, play, and simply be. But for her, that was a luxury she could never afford. As she grew older, Maya's bitterness and anger began to take root. She withdrew further into herself, building walls around her heart to protect herself from the pain. She spent more and more time alone, avoiding the crowds and the stares. In her solitude, she began to find solace in books, in the quiet worlds they offered, where she could escape and imagine a life where she wasn't judged, where she could simply exist without fear of rejection. But even in those moments of escape, the reality of her situation always loomed large. Maya was trapped not just by her circumstances, but by the rejection she faced both at home and in her community. The worst part of Maya's experience was that she couldn't escape the hatred that came from those she trusted the most. Her father's rejection and the cruel treatment she received from her peers built a foundation of self-loathing and isolation that would take years to overcome. Maya's soul yearned for acceptance, for love, for a chance to belong. But the more she tried to reach out, the more the world seemed to push her away. In the eyes of the town, she would always be the monkey girl, the outsider, the one who didn't belong. Yet, despite everything, Maya's story was far from over. In the deepest corners of her heart, she knew that one day she would rise above the pain. She would find the strength to reclaim her identity, to prove to herself and to the world that she was more than the sum of her scars. But for now, Maya's journey had just begun, and the path ahead would be filled with obstacles, challenges, and moments of self-discovery that would ultimately shape the woman she would become. As Maya stood in the midst of her pain, she began to understand that the rejection she faced was not a reflection of her worth. It was a reflection of the brokenness of those who rejected her. And as she grew, she realized that in order to heal, she would have to confront her past, embrace her true self, and learn to love the woman she was becoming no matter how the world saw her. Part 2. The Pains from the Outside. Section 1. Growing Up in the Shadows. Maya Thompson's life was one constantly lived in the shadows of prejudice. No matter how hard her mother, Rose, tried to protect her, the harsh reality of the world outside their home was always waiting to tear her down. Maya's childhood was marked by rejection not just from her peers, but from the community she lived in. Rose, despite her love and affection, couldn't shield Maya from the harshness of a society that had already decided Maya didn't belong. Her father's cruelty was just the beginning. It was the town's cold indifference that cemented Maya's isolation. From a young age, Maya was taught by the world that she was an outsider. The other children would avoid her, as if her presence was something to be feared. No one played with her, no one invited her to birthday parties, and she learned quickly that her worth was measured by something she couldn't control: her skin color. Maya was not accepted, and the constant rejection from both her peers and the adults around her made her feel as though she was invisible. No matter how much she tried to fit in, she was always on the outside looking in. Her mother, Rose, loved her with every ounce of her being. Rose's heart ached to see the pain Maya endured, but even her unconditional love could not erase the hurt Maya felt. Rose had lived a life of her own quiet struggles, shaped by the same oppressive society. Although she tried to protect Maya, Rose couldn't offer her daughter what she longed for: true acceptance. Maya spent her early years trapped between her mother's love and the world's disdain. Rose would console her in quiet moments, but the moments when the world turned its back on Maya were far too frequent. It wasn't just the rejection from her peers that broke Maya's spirit. It was the silence and inaction of the adults around her. In her small town, everyone knew about the girl with the dark skin and awkward features. And yet, no one seemed to care enough to challenge the prejudices that kept Maya at the edges of every social group. Maya's father, Edward, dismissed her existence entirely, and the community, who could have helped her, simply accepted the toxic atmosphere without question. Maya became a reflection of society's brokenness, with no one willing to stand up for her. Her father's rejection, combined with the community's indifference, created a toxic environment where Maya was forced to grow up in the shadows both physically and emotionally. Maya's life was one long battle against the forces that sought to diminish her. There were times when she wished she could escape, but there was no place for her to go. The world outside offered her no solace, and the world inside her family was just as cruel. Maya's childhood, instead of being filled with joy and exploration, was instead marked by loneliness and fear. It seemed as if there was no way out of the darkness that surrounded her. Her sense of identity was shaped by the rejection she faced at every turn, and she began to believe that maybe she didn't deserve anything better. In the evenings, when her mother would try to comfort her, Maya would listen to the sound of the town, its whispers and judgments seeping through the walls. It was then, in the quietest moments, that Maya would dream of a world where she wasn't the other, where she was loved, seen, and valued. But those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't stuck in the shadows. Even her mother's love couldn't convince her that she had any value in a world that refused to see her. Prejudice and isolation. As Maya grew older, the weight of societal rejection grew heavier. The taunts and jeers from the other children became more intense, and the cruel nickname, Monkey Girl, followed her wherever she went. It wasn't just the children who treated her with disdain. The adults, too, looked down on her. The social exclusion she faced in the streets, in the parks, and in her own neighborhood created an invisible wall between her and the rest of the world. Maya learned to avoid the public gaze, to shrink back when people looked her way. It was as if every time she stepped out of the house, she was walking into a battle she was destined to lose. The teasing escalated as Maya reached her teenage years. The children, no longer shy about their cruelty, would actively avoid her in class and in the streets. They mocked her appearance, her speech, and even the way she walked. No matter what she did, Maya couldn't escape the ridicule. The words monkey and freak became her constant companions. The isolation was suffocating. She tried to make friends, to reach out to others, but each attempt was met with cold indifference or open hostility. Maya began to internalize the hurt, believing that perhaps she truly was different in a way that made her unworthy of love or friendship. What hurt the most was the absence of support from the adults who should have known better. The teachers at school turned a blind eye to the bullying, too focused on their own lives or too complacent in the prejudice of the town. When Maya came home with tears in her eyes, her mother, Rose, would hold her tightly, whispering comforting words, but it was clear to Maya that this love wasn't enough to shield her from the world's cruelty. Rose had spent her entire life enduring her own form of quiet oppression, and while she tried to protect Maya, she had no power to change the attitudes of those who shunned her daughter. Maya's pain was compounded by the feeling that her mother, no matter how much she loved her, could not protect her from the prejudice that ran so deep in the town's fabric. Maya's bitterness grew as she continued to face these challenges. She became more withdrawn, less willing to trust others. The idea of belonging to any community felt like an impossible dream. She spent her days alone, finding solace in books and daydreams. She would imagine a life far away from Shadow Valley, where she was not defined by her race or her appearance. But as much as she tried to escape mentally, the reality of her life remained unchanged. She was the other, the one who was always looked down upon, never truly accepted, and always the target of the town's scorn. The constant rejection took a toll on Maya's sense of self. Every insult, every exclusion made her question her worth. She stopped trying to fit in, stopped trying to be like the others, because it felt like an exercise in futility. She had learned to hide her pain, to bury it deep inside where no one could see it. But the truth was, every time she went out into the world, it felt like she was being torn apart from the inside out. Maya's soul was marked by the prejudice she faced, and she began to wonder if it was ever possible to escape this prison of rejection. Her experience was not unique, but it was painfully personal. Maya's journey was not just one of racial prejudice, but of self-discovery, of trying to make sense of a world that refused to accept her. As she entered adulthood, she began to wonder if there was a way out, if she could find a place where she could belong. But the road ahead seemed uncertain, and the weight of isolation was becoming unbearable. Would she ever be able to rise above the prejudice and find her place in the world? Or would she forever remain trapped in the shadows of her past? These questions lingered in her mind, pushing her forward into the unknown, toward a future where she would have to confront her past and the pain of rejection that defined it. Self-discovery. Encouragement from Linda. One fateful day, Maya met Linda, a white woman with whom she formed a bond when she began working a new job. Linda was different from the others Maya had encountered in her life. Instead of seeing Maya through the lens of race or preconceived notions, Linda treated her as a human being, as an equal. She didn't look at Maya's skin color or her past struggles. Instead, she saw Maya's potential and believed in her abilities. Linda encouraged Maya to explore new opportunities, to challenge herself, and to trust in her own strength. Linda's unwavering support became the anchor that Maya had been searching for her whole life. In a world where she had been constantly rejected, Linda offered a fresh perspective, one that was free from prejudice and filled with genuine kindness. It was Linda who inspired Maya to take her first steps outside her comfort zone, to push herself in ways she never thought possible. Linda's belief in Maya was a gift that Maya cherished deeply. For the first time, Maya felt like someone truly cared about her and believed in her future. Linda would often take the time to have conversations with Maya, offering guidance and wisdom. She encouraged Maya to think beyond the limitations imposed on her by society and to pursue her passions, no matter how unattainable they seemed. "You are capable of more than you know," Linda would say, her words echoing in Maya's mind. Linda was the friend Maya never had, the one who taught her the power of self-belief, and more importantly, the value of seeing herself as worthy of love, respect, and success. Linda's friendship was transformative for Maya. For the first time, she felt seen not for her skin color or her background, but for who she truly was inside. Linda's encouragement gave Maya the courage to dream again, to imagine a future that wasn't defined by the prejudice of her past. Their friendship blossomed, and Maya began to feel a sense of belonging that she had never known before. It was Linda's kindness, paired with her unwavering belief in Maya's potential, that allowed Maya to start her journey towards self-discovery and personal growth. Through Linda, Maya learned that her worth was not tied to how others saw her, but to how she saw herself. Linda taught her to challenge the stereotypes and limitations that society had placed on her, and most importantly, to embrace her unique identity. Maya had spent so much of her life trying to fit into a mold that didn't belong to her, but Linda's influence encouraged her to carve out her own path, one that was authentic and true to herself. The friendship they shared became a beacon of light in Maya's life, guiding her through the darkness of self-doubt and helping her find the courage to pursue her dreams. Self-awareness. As Maya continued to grow and evolve, she started to realize that she didn't need to change herself to fit into society's expectations. Linda's encouragement was the catalyst for this transformation, helping Maya recognize her true worth. For years, Maya had internalized the hurtful words and actions of others, believing that she needed to alter her appearance, her behavior, or her very essence to gain acceptance. But with Linda's support, Maya slowly began to understand that her uniqueness was not something to hide, it was something to embrace. Maya's journey of self-discovery wasn't immediate. It was a process of unlearning the harmful beliefs she had carried with her for so long. She began to ask herself important questions. Who am I really? And what do I want from life? Not for others, but for myself. These questions sparked a deep inner exploration, one that Maya had never allowed herself to experience before. The world had always defined her based on her skin color, her background, and her perceived flaws, but now she was determined to define herself. Maya started to engage in activities that aligned with her true interests and passions, regardless of what others thought. She joined community organizations, attended workshops, and began exploring new hobbies. She was no longer afraid to pursue what brought her joy, whether it was painting, writing, or social activism. Maya began to follow her own path, seeking fulfillment from within instead of from the approval of others. She started to build a new life, one that was focused on her own desires and dreams. The more Maya explored her true self, the more she realized that she had been carrying the weight of others' expectations for far too long. Society had taught her to be small, to conform, and to hide the parts of herself that were different. But now, Maya was learning to stand tall and be proud of who she was, no matter what anyone else thought. She discovered that her individuality was her strength, not something to be ashamed of. Her journey towards self-acceptance was ongoing, but each step she took brought her closer to a version of herself that was free from the chains of societal judgment. As Maya's confidence grew, so did her understanding of her own value. She no longer measured her worth based on how others treated her or how much they accepted her. Maya began to see herself as someone capable of achieving greatness, someone whose dreams were worth pursuing. She understood that the path to self-discovery was not about changing to fit into the world, but about creating a world where she could thrive as her authentic self. Maya's journey was a profound one, a journey of learning to love herself, to stand tall in the face of adversity, and to forge her own path in a world that often tried to hold her back. Her transformation was not just about finding her place in the world. It was about realizing that she had always had the power to shape that world, to make a difference, and to be unapologetically herself. Maya's self-awareness became the foundation upon which she would build the rest of her life. And with Linda's encouragement, she knew she had the strength to face whatever challenges came her way. The journey of pain, the way out of darkness. Despite the support from Linda, Maya still had to confront the deep pain within her. The wounds caused by years of rejection, discrimination, and neglect were not easily healed. It seemed like no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the harshness of the world. She struggled with a feeling of powerlessness like a small boat tossed in a stormy sea, desperately trying to stay afloat, but unable to escape the overwhelming current. Linda had become an anchor for Maya, a beacon of light in the darkest of times. But as much as Linda's encouragement helped, Maya realized that she could not stay forever in the shadow of her mother's love and protection. There came a moment of reckoning, a painful realization that in order to heal and move forward, she had to take control of her own destiny. Maya understood that while her mother's love was important, it wasn't enough to free her from the chains of societal prejudice. The darkness she felt was not just a reflection of her environment. It was a battle that raged inside of her. She was her own prisoner. The pain that Maya carried from childhood wasn't just external. It was embedded deep within her psyche. The voices of those who had rejected her, the judgment of her peers, and even the cruel indifference of her father, their words, had formed a web that trapped her in a mental prison. No matter how hard she tried to shake off the negativity, it always seemed to come back. This internal struggle was one of the toughest battles Maya had to face. She had spent years convincing herself that she didn't matter, that her worth was tied to how others perceived her. But that false belief was crumbling now. To confront the demons within, Maya realized that she needed to confront the world outside as well. She could no longer live in the shadows of shame and self-doubt. She had to find a way to break free from the darkness that held her captive. This was not an easy journey, and the pain of every rejection and insult still haunted her. But Maya started to realize that the process of healing wasn't about forgetting the pain. It was about acknowledging it and choosing to move forward anyway. The journey towards self-liberation was not a linear path. It was filled with setbacks, struggles, and moments of doubt. Yet, Maya knew that the only way out of this darkness was through it. There were times when Maya wanted to give up, to retreat back into the safety of her solitude. But Linda's words echoed in her mind, reminding her that she was worthy of more than this life of fear and self-hatred. Slowly, she started to take small steps toward breaking free from the emotional chains that bound her. Every day became an opportunity to fight back against the negativity that had shaped her life. Maya learned to confront her insecurities, to face her fears, and to push through the pain, knowing that each step forward was a victory in itself. It was through this inner battle that Maya began to realize that her true strength didn't lie in her ability to avoid pain, it was in her ability to endure it and rise above it. Section 2. Stepping into society. Maya made a decision she would no longer live in the shadows of her own isolation. She refused to remain in a world of silence and passivity. For too long, she had allowed the world around her to define who she was. Now, she was determined to take control of her own narrative. Maya stepped out of the darkness of her personal struggles and into the light of activism. She realized that the journey to heal herself was not just about personal growth, it was also about contributing to the world around her. Her first steps into activism were not easy. Maya joined movements advocating for racial equality, fighting against the very injustices that had shaped her life. She began attending protests, speaking out about the prejudice that had oppressed her and countless others. But the road was filled with challenges. The systems of power that perpetuated inequality were not easily shaken, and Maya often felt like a lone voice in a sea of indifference. She encountered resistance at every turn, not just from society at large, but even from people who claimed to support her cause. The weight of the world seemed even heavier as she ventured deeper into the world of social justice. Maya faced opposition from those in positions of power who sought to maintain the status quo. It was easy to feel disheartened, as though her efforts were nothing more than a drop in an ocean of injustice. She struggled with feelings of inadequacy and frustration, questioning whether her voice could really make a difference. But despite the challenges, Maya knew that she couldn't turn back. She had spent too long hiding from the world, and now she had found a cause that was worth fighting for her own future, the future of those like her, and the collective fight for equality. As she became more involved in the movement, Maya began to learn more about the systemic issues that fueled racism, discrimination, and inequality. She realized that her personal battle was just a small piece of a much larger fight that spanned generations and societies. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she became empowered. Every protest, every rally, and every speech she gave became an act of defiance against the system that had tried to silence her for so long. Maya began to see that her own journey towards self-discovery was inextricably linked to the larger struggle for justice and equality. While the road was difficult and filled with obstacles, Maya started to see the fruits of her labor. Her voice began to matter. Her presence in the movement gave others the courage to speak out, to stand up for their rights, and to fight against the prejudice that held them back. Maya realized that activism was not just about creating change in the world, it was also about creating change within herself. She had gone from a place of self-doubt and shame to a place of empowerment and strength, and that transformation became the foundation for everything she fought for. Through activism, Maya discovered the power of solidarity and the importance of community. She learned that she was not alone in her fight, and that together, people could create the change that was so desperately needed. The pain of her past was still there, but was no longer the driving force of her life. Instead, Maya chose to let the struggle for equality and justice propel her forward, knowing that her journey of self-liberation was tied to the liberation of others. Embracing the past, the journey of forgiveness. Maya's journey towards healing was never easy, but one of the most crucial steps in her transformation was learning the power of forgiveness. For years, she had carried the heavy burden of anger and resentment, particularly toward her father. Edward, her father, had rejected her from the moment she was born, and his cruel words and dismissive actions had left deep scars. Maya had spent most of her life believing that his lack of love was a reflection of her worth. His rejection, compounded by the cruelty of her community, had shaped the way she viewed herself for years. But as Maya began her path towards self-discovery and healing, she realized that holding onto this anger was only holding her back. The bitterness she felt toward her father and the wounds inflicted by his words were consuming her and preventing her from moving forward. She knew that if she wanted to find peace, she had to let go of the hatred that had been festering inside her for so long. This realization didn't come easily. Maya didn't just wake up one day and decide to forgive. It was a difficult, painful process. Every time she thought of her father, the memories of his cruelty would resurface, and she would feel the sharp sting of rejection once again. But Maya had learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting it, was about freeing herself from the chains of the past. The act of forgiving her father wasn't about excusing his behavior. It was about reclaiming her own peace. Maya realized that she didn't have to carry the weight of his mistakes any longer. In forgiving him, she was not making him the victor. She was taking back control of her own narrative. Through this process, Maya also learned to forgive herself. For years, she had blamed herself for the dysfunction in her family, for the emotional neglect she had endured. She had internalized her father's rejection, convinced that she was somehow unworthy of love and acceptance. But through the journey of forgiveness, she began to understand that the damage done to her was not her fault. Maya was able to recognize that her father's actions were a reflection of his own pain, his own insecurities, and his inability to show love. And once she understood that, she was able to let go of the belief that his rejection defined her. Forgiveness was liberating for Maya. It allowed her to stop being held hostage by her past and start living for herself. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pain resurfaced and the anger flared up again. But each time, she reminded herself that forgiveness wasn't a one-time event. It was a continual process. Maya began to forgive not just her father, but also the people who had hurt her along the way. With every step of forgiveness, she felt lighter, freer, and more capable of building the life she deserved. This was the beginning of her true healing. Embracing a new life. As Maya learned to forgive, she also began to embrace the life that was waiting for her. She had spent so many years searching for validation and love from people who were incapable of giving it to her. Maya's whole life had been centered around trying to prove her worth to others, especially her father. She had longed for his approval, even though deep down, she knew it was something he would never give. The constant need to be accepted by her family and society had drained her. But with forgiveness came acceptance, the acceptance of herself, of her flaws, and of her past. Maya no longer needed validation from her father or from anyone else. For the first time, she began to realize that her worth was not determined by how others saw her, but by how she saw herself. Maya had always been a strong and resilient woman, but for years, she had allowed the opinions of others to shape her identity. Now, she was learning to shape her own identity based on her own values and beliefs. She began to see her own potential not as a victim of her circumstances, but as a woman capable of achieving greatness on her own terms. With her newfound sense of self-worth, Maya began to live a life that was true to herself. She no longer sought approval from her family, and she stopped trying to conform to societal expectations. Instead, Maya focused on doing the things that made her happy and fulfilled. She started a career that was meaningful to her, one that allowed her to make a difference in her community and to help others who had faced similar struggles. She found joy in simple things like spending time with Linda, who had been her rock throughout her journey, and engaging in activities that brought her peace and fulfillment. Maya's journey of self-acceptance also led her to explore new relationships. She no longer believed that she had to settle for toxic relationships or for people who would only bring her down. Maya understood that she deserved people in her life who would lift her up, support her, and treat her with respect. As she started to build new friendships and connections, she found that the world was full of people who saw her for who she truly was, not the broken girl she had once been, but the strong, capable, and compassionate woman she had become. This transformation wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Maya had spent so many years allowing her past to define her. She had allowed the pain and rejection of her childhood to hold her back. But by embracing her past, forgiving those who had hurt her, and accepting herself for who she truly was, Maya was able to break free from the chains that had bound her for so long. She was no longer a prisoner of her past. She was free to live a life full of possibility and promise. Maya's journey wasn't just about personal growth, it was also about giving back. Through her work and her activism, she found purpose in helping others who had been marginalized and oppressed. Maya's story became a beacon of hope for those who had been rejected by society, showing them that they too could overcome the struggles of their past and create a future filled with opportunity. By embracing her own healing, Maya was able to help others heal as well, creating a ripple effect of change that would continue for generations to come. New steps forward. The journey to independence. Maya's journey of transformation didn't just stop with self-acceptance and forgiveness. It was only the beginning of her journey into independence and the pursuit of greater dreams. No longer was she the timid girl from a small town weighed down by the limitations of her past. She had learned to walk away from the shadows of her painful history, ready to step into a world that held endless possibilities. Maya's new outlook on life gave her the courage to pursue goals that once seemed impossible to reach. She began to understand that the world outside her small town wasn't as daunting as it once appeared. Maya had always been confined by her environment, her family's expectations, and society's judgment. But now, she was determined to break free. She envisioned a future where she could not only succeed, but excel. Maya decided to embark on a career in the arts and area she had always been passionate about, but had never dared to pursue seriously before. Art became her way of expressing herself, her true self, without fear or inhibition. It was a means of both personal catharsis and external communication, a way to show the world her story in a way that was uniquely hers. In order to build a career in the art world, Maya knew she had to take risks. She moved to the city, seeking new opportunities, connecting with professionals, and immersing herself in the vibrant art scene. The road was not easy. There were obstacles, rejections, and self-doubt, but she kept pushing forward. She found strength in her resilience, and with each challenge, she grew more confident in her abilities. Maya focused on honing her craft, dedicating herself to improving her techniques, learning from others, and embracing every experience as an opportunity to grow. As Maya advanced in her career, she built a solid foundation, not only in the art world, but also in her own financial stability. For the first time, she was financially independent, standing on her own 2 feet without relying on anyone else. She learned the importance of managing her own finances, creating her own success, and owning her decisions. Maya's success was not just about the recognition she received for her art. It was also about the pride she felt in her own growth and independence. Her transformation was tangible. She had gone from the girl who once questioned her worth to the woman who now walked confidently, knowing that she was capable of achieving whatever she set her mind to. This newfound independence was not just about career achievements. It also meant freedom from the limitations imposed by others. Maya was no longer confined to the role society expected her to play. She was finally in control of her own destiny, making choices based on her own values, desires, and aspirations. With each new step, she moved further away from the girl who had lived in fear and isolation, toward the woman who was embracing the vast opportunities that the world had to offer. The shift in relationships. Maya's growth wasn't confined to her career or her personal identity. It also deeply impacted her relationships with the people around her. One of the most significant changes was the healing of her relationship with her mother, Rose. For years, their bond had been strained, overshadowed by Rose's own struggles and inability to protect her daughter from the harshness of their world. Maya had carried a lot of anger and resentment towards her mother, especially for her inability to stand up to Maya's father, Edward. But as Maya grew stronger and learned to forgive, she realized that her mother had always done the best she could, even though she was unable to shield Maya from the hurt. Maya began to understand that her mother's own pain and limitations had shaped her actions or lack thereof in the past. Rose had been stuck in a cycle of fear and weakness, a product of her own upbringing and circumstances. Maya's forgiveness allowed her to see her mother through new eyes, and in turn, Rose also began to recognize the strength and independence in her daughter. Over time, Maya helped her mother realize that she, too, could break free from the confines of her past. Maya showed Rose that she deserved more than a life of submission and self-sacrifice. She encouraged her mother to pursue her own dreams, to find her own voice, and to live for herself as well. The shift in their relationship was not instantaneous. It took time, patience, and a willingness to confront the wounds of their shared past. Together, they began to heal. Maya made a conscious effort to spend more quality time with Rose, offering her emotional support and encouraging her to make changes in her life. She helped Rose understand that it was never too late to create a life that was fulfilling and free from regret. This transformation wasn't just about Maya forgiving her mother. It was about Maya showing her that it was possible to heal, grow, and find happiness, regardless of the past. As their bond strengthened, they were able to find new ways of connecting through shared activities, open conversations, and a deep sense of mutual respect. Maya and Rose began to rebuild their relationship, not as parent and child in the traditional sense, but as two women who had been through the fire and had emerged stronger. In the process, Maya also improved her relationships with her friends and extended family. She found that as she became more authentic and true to herself, her connections with others deepened. Maya no longer felt the need to conform to the expectations of others. Instead, she embraced her own identity and encouraged others to do the same. She surrounded herself with people who supported her growth, and as a result, her life became richer, fuller, and more meaningful. She had learned that healthy relationships weren't about pleasing others or fitting into preconceived roles. They were about mutual respect, understanding, and shared growth. As Maya continued her journey of self-discovery, she realized that the relationships she had with others could only thrive if she first nurtured the relationship she had with herself. She had learned to love herself, forgive herself, and believe in her own worth. And in doing so, she had created a foundation for her relationships that was strong, supportive, and based on love and respect. Through this process, Maya had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of those around her as well. The journey of building independence and career. Maya had come a long way since the dark days of rejection and isolation. With the support of Linda and her own inner strength, she had rebuilt her life from the ground up. Now, Maya stood on the precipice of a new chapter, one that was defined by her independence and the pursuit of a meaningful career. She was no longer the girl who had been shunned by society, nor the woman trapped in the shadows of her family's expectations. Maya had found her own voice, and she was ready to make her mark on the world. Her journey into the world of art had been challenging but incredibly rewarding. As she took her first steps into a professional career in the arts, she had to confront many obstacles. There were countless moments when she questioned whether she was good enough, whether her work would be accepted, or whether society would ever truly embrace her for who she was. Yet, Maya had learned to persevere. She realized that true success was not about conforming to societal expectations, but about staying true to herself, regardless of the challenges that stood in her way. In her art, Maya found a new form of expression. The canvas became her space of liberation, a place where she could pour her emotions, dreams, and personal experiences into tangible works of beauty. Each stroke of the brush became an act of defiance against the limitations that had been placed on her by others. She no longer needed approval or validation from anyone. Maya's work was a reflection of her journey, her struggles, her triumphs, and her unyielding spirit. Despite her growing success, the path was far from easy. She encountered rejection from galleries and institutions that refused to take her work seriously, simply because of her background and the color of her skin. Yet, each rejection only fueled her determination. Maya realized that no matter how difficult the journey became, Her art was her truth, and that truth had a place in the world. She began to build a network of like-minded individuals, people who valued her work for what it was, not for the label society wanted to place on her. Maya found strength in these connections, and slowly but surely, she established herself as a respected artist. Through her perseverance, Maya was able to secure her first solo exhibition in a prominent gallery. It was a huge milestone, one that marked not just the beginning of her career, but also the beginning of a new era in her life. She had gone from being the marginalized girl with no future to becoming a powerful voice in the art world. Maya knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She had built a foundation of independence, and she was determined to continue to rise, no matter what. Freedom in creativity. As Maya continued to grow in her career and personal life, she discovered that her creative expression extended far beyond the confines of art. Creativity, she realized, was not just about making beautiful paintings or sculptures. It was about creating the life she wanted for herself. Maya had spent so many years feeling trapped in a world that didn't understand her, fighting against the constant pressures to conform to be something she wasn't. Now, she had come to understand that true freedom lay not just in her art, but in her ability to shape her own destiny. Maya's newfound freedom came from the realization that she no longer had to live according to the rules set by others. She had spent so many years trying to fit into a world that rejected her, believing that she needed to change herself to be accepted. But now, she saw that she had the power to create her own rules, to shape her own life in a way that felt true to her. She began to live with intention, making choices based on her own desires, not on the expectations of others. With each decision, Maya felt a deeper sense of liberation. She didn't need validation from anyone. She didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. Maya had learned to love herself and to trust in her own abilities. She knew that her life was hers to create, and that was the greatest gift she could give herself. This realization allowed her to embrace the unknown, to take risks, and to challenge herself in ways she never thought possible. Maya's freedom and creativity extended beyond her art into her everyday life. She found new ways to express herself, whether through the clothes she wore, the words she spoke, or the way she moved through the world. Maya stopped hiding, stopped apologizing for who she was. She became unapologetically herself, embracing her identity and her voice in a world that had once tried to silence her. She felt the weight of years of oppression lifting, replaced by a sense of power and autonomy that had always been within her. Every day, Maya woke up with a sense of possibility. She no longer felt confined by the labels that others had placed on her. She knew that she was the creator of her own life, and that realization brought a profound sense of peace. With every step she took, Maya felt herself becoming more and more aligned with her true purpose. She no longer saw obstacles as roadblocks, but as opportunities for growth and self-expression. Maya's journey of self-discovery had not only freed her as an artist, but also as a woman, a daughter, and a human being. In the end, Maya's greatest creation was not just her art, but the life she had built for herself. It was a life filled with authenticity, freedom, and the courage to live boldly and unapologetically. Maya had learned that true creativity came not from the act of creating something external, but from the act of creating a life that was true to herself. And in that process, she had found the ultimate freedom to be herself, to live fully, and to continue shaping the world around her with the power of her creativity. Facing the challenge, ideals, and acceptance. Despite Maya's success, her journey was far from a smooth one. She had worked hard to achieve her place in the world, but the deeper she immersed herself in her career, the more she realized that her ideals, her commitment to equality, creativity, and freedom were constantly tested by external forces. It became increasingly apparent that no matter how much progress she made, the world around her would challenge her principles. Those who held power in society, those who benefited from the status quo, would always be resistant to change. And in this resistance, Maya found herself confronting an ongoing struggle to maintain her identity and values. Her rise in the art world, once a dream, now felt like a battlefield. The success she had achieved had come at a price: scrutiny, skepticism, and prejudice. She was continually reminded that her ideals were not universally embraced. People admired her work, but many were still uncomfortable with the person she had become, the bold, unapologetic woman who had dared to defy the norms and expectations placed upon her. The challenge, Maya knew, was not just about proving her talent, but about staying true to herself in an environment that would prefer her to conform. In the face of this, Maya resolved not to bend to the pressures around her. She would not allow herself to become someone else just to fit in. Her struggle for acceptance had never been easy, and now, as her career grew, it felt like the stakes were even higher. She could not afford to compromise on her values, not when her success represented a beacon of hope for others who had faced similar struggles. Every time she faced criticism, every time her ideals were questioned, Maya reaffirmed her commitment to her cause. She had come so far, and she knew that standing firm was the only way forward. The world may never fully accept her, but she was ready to fight for her place in it. Her values would be her anchor, no matter the waves of doubt and resistance that crashed against her. Maya learned that real acceptance, both from others and from within, was not about fitting into someone else's mold. It was about holding steadfast to her identity, her beliefs, and her dreams. While the world could challenge her, it could never take away the strength she had built from within. As long as she remained true to herself, she could face whatever challenges arose. Maya understood that her journey was not just about being accepted by others. It was about accepting herself, flaws and all, and continuing to rise despite the odds. Embracing change. As Maya continued on her journey, she began to realize that change was an inevitable part of life. No matter how much she had accomplished, things were never going to stay the same. At first, the idea of change filled her with uncertainty. She had worked so hard to build her career and identity, and the thought of things shifting, whether in her personal life or in her professional world, felt overwhelming. However, Maya soon understood that change was not something to fear, but something to embrace. Change, she came to realize, was the very thing that kept her growing. It was through change that she had found strength, resilience, and the ability to adapt. But for Maya, embracing change meant letting go of the need for everything to be perfect. Life, she now understood, was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be lived fully, to be experienced in all its complexity and imperfection. Perfection, Maya saw, was an illusion, and the pursuit of it had often left her feeling drained and frustrated. Instead of striving for an unattainable ideal, Maya learned to focus on the journey itself. She found joy in the small victories, in the moments of personal growth that came with each step she took. She embraced the idea that life was a continuous process of learning, evolving, and adapting. Maya realized that the true beauty of life lay not in perfection, but in progress, the slow, steady evolution of who she was becoming. She no longer felt the need to meet others' expectations, to prove herself to anyone. Instead, she focused on living authentically and finding fulfillment in her own choices. Maya's understanding of change shifted from something frightening to something liberating. She began to let go of the fear of failure, the fear of not measuring up. Instead, she embraced the idea that failure was simply another step in the process of learning. She knew now that she did not have to be perfect, nor did she need anyone else's approval to be happy with herself. The path forward was not about achieving some idealized version of success, but about creating a life that was uniquely her own, one that reflected her values, her growth, and her authenticity. Her relationships also underwent a transformation. As Maya embraced the idea of change, she began to see her connections with others in a new light. She understood that people were not static. They changed, they grew, and they evolved just like she did. This understanding brought Maya a sense of peace. She no longer held on to grudges or resentment. Instead, she learned to accept both herself and others for who they truly were. The result was a deeper, more authentic connection with the people in her life. Maya's ability to embrace change was the key to her continued success. She understood that life was not about avoiding change, but about navigating it with grace and resilience. The challenges she faced were not obstacles to be feared, but opportunities for growth. With this new perspective, Maya moved forward with confidence, knowing that she could face whatever came her way and come out stronger on the other side. Life was not about holding on to the past or resisting the future. It was about embracing the journey, no matter where it took her. Inner peace. Finding peace within. Maya's journey toward inner peace was not something that happened overnight. It was a gradual process of letting go of the expectations of others and finding the strength to live authentically. For years, Maya had sought validation from others, hoping that approval from her family, friends, and society would fill the emptiness she felt inside. But after all the struggles, the pain, and the triumphs, Maya came to understand that true peace could only come when she stopped seeking external validation and started embracing herself. The key to her inner peace was acceptance. Maya realized that there was no need to conform to other people's expectations of her life. She no longer sought to be accepted by her family, who had never truly understood her, or by society, which had rejected her for being different. Maya came to understand that it was her own love and respect for herself that mattered the most. She began to focus on the things that made her feel fulfilled and happy, free from the constraints of societal norms. Living authentically, Maya began to find peace in the small moments of everyday life. Whether it was a quiet morning with a cup of coffee or an evening spent painting, Maya learned to appreciate these simple joys. No longer did she feel the need to chase after a version of success that others expected of her. She had finally accepted herself as she was, imperfections and all. This acceptance allowed her to find tranquility in every day. Her relationship with her mother also transformed, as Maya now understood that she did not need her mother's approval to feel complete. She had found a way to nurture herself, and through this she could offer the same kind of unconditional love and support to her mother. This change in Maya's attitude allowed her to feel a sense of inner calm that she had never known before. She was no longer held back by fear or shame. Instead, she could move through the world with a peaceful heart, knowing that she was living according to her truth. The process of finding peace wasn't easy, and Maya knew there would be challenges ahead. But with every step she took, she felt more grounded and connected to herself. She could now face the world without the constant need to prove anything to anyone. Maya had reached a place where she no longer doubted her worth. She understood that her peace came not from the external world, but from within herself. It was a peace that could not be shaken by criticism, rejection, or failure. Maya had become her own anchor, feeling the freedom. For Maya, the most profound realization was that freedom wasn't a destination, it was a journey. As she had spent years chasing external success, she had forgotten that true freedom comes from within. It wasn't about escaping her past or running away from the struggles she had faced. It was about embracing who she was, letting go of the shackles of others' opinions, and living a life that was authentically hers. Maya began to understand that freedom was about having the courage to be herself without apology. It was about standing in her own truth, regardless of how others might perceive her. For years, she had tried to conform to societal standards, thinking that success would bring her happiness and acceptance. But the more she conformed, the more she felt stifled, like a bird trapped in a cage. The freedom she had longed for was not in the accolades or recognition from others, but in the ability to live according to her own values. Living this new freedom, Maya started to pursue what truly mattered to her. She no longer lived to please others, and that realization allowed her to break free from the chains that had bound her for so long. She found joy in her work, in the art she created, and in the relationships she built. Maya's life was no longer defined by external achievements or others' approval. She had found a way to live that felt true to who she was, and this authenticity was the key to her newfound freedom. Maya also realized that freedom was about accepting the unpredictability of life. It wasn't about controlling everything or having all the answers. It was about being at peace with the uncertainty and allowing herself to be present in the moment. She stopped obsessing over what could go wrong and instead focused on embracing each experience as it came, whether it was a setback or a triumph. Maya understood that life was a continuous journey of growth and self-discovery. As Maya embraced this newfound sense of freedom, she felt lighter. No longer burdened by the weight of judgment or expectation, she could move through life with ease. She could make choices that aligned with her values, and she was no longer afraid of what others thought. This freedom allowed her to take risks, try new things, and step into uncharted territory without fear. In the process, Maya's relationships deepened. She no longer clung to people for validation or approval. Instead, she engaged with others from a place of genuine connection. She could give love without expecting anything in return, and in turn, she received love in the most authentic way possible. This freedom, Maya realized, was not just about individual liberation, it was about building true connections with others, free from the constraints of fear or insecurity. Ultimately, Maya understood that freedom was about living a life that was uniquely hers, free from the judgments and limitations that had once held her back. It wasn't about perfection. It was about embracing the fullness of who she was and allowing herself the space to grow, learn, and evolve. As Maya moved forward in her life, she did so with a sense of peace and freedom that came from deep within. She had found the courage to be herself, and in doing so, she had unlocked the true meaning of freedom. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Stories TH for more powerful and inspiring tales. See you next time.